The big nations in the world, the main powers, are not actually at war with each other and haven't been obviously for several years, but that does not mean that they're at peace. We're in a sort of stage at the moment of what some people call a hot peace or a hybrid warfare. And what that means is that whereas we are not directly fighting against our enemies, we are doing so in different ways. So hybrid warfare can include, for instance, cyber attacks. It can include misinformation campaigns. It can be proxy support, like the Western military support for Ukraine, if you like, assassination attempts overseas, using mercenaries like the Wagner Group to undermine the United Nations and Western countries in Africa, as the Russians have been doing. All these are elements of hybrid warfare in that sort of grey zone between war and peace, which is why the intelligence agencies of all the major powers have become even more important in today's security world than they were before. Well, I've seen the US UK transatlantic relationship throughout my career, right back to when I first joined the Foreign Office and Argentina invaded the Falklands, and we got invaluable support from the Americans, albeit secret support, military support, in order to retake the Falkland Islands in 1982. Now, to my mind, it absolutely underpins our security, the bilateral relationship. I don't know how many times during my career commentators have said that the special relationship is dead because there's been some snub or some alleged snub by the US president to the UK Prime Minister. Or, for instance, when Joe Biden announced the withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2022 without sort of consulting his European allies. But the reality is that the relationship is based on the fundamentals beneath the surface, if you like, in nuclear issues, in defense issues, in intelligence issues, in broader security issues. So that relationship is fundamental, not just to our security, but it's also important for the Americans, because the United Kingdom offers the Americans some valuable military bases in our dependent territories overseas, some important intelligence bases, both in the UK and also overseas. So it is a two-way relationship, obviously not completely equal, but it is of fundamental importance to both countries, and I think will continue to be so into the future. Well, I've met most of the important world leaders of today, whether that's President Putin, Donald Trump, Xi Jinping of China. And I think it's difficult to say that they all have similar characteristics because they've all come to power in different ways. They all come from slightly different backgrounds. But if we look at politicians and leaders more generally, particularly in the United Kingdom, I have found during my long association with politicians that they generally have two traits in common. One is a very high sense of self-worth. Because if you're putting yourself up for election, or even if you're conducting a military coup, you think that you have something to offer your country or the world. So very high sense of self-worth. The second, and this is particularly true of the United Kingdom, is all politicians have a gambling streak. Now, I think this partly goes down to the fact that politics is a very hazardous business. 1 minute you're in power, next minute you're not in power. You can lose your seat and lose your career as a result. But I am never surprised when politicians are caught on Hampstead Heath with their trousers down or something, because they have that sort of gambling streak and they know that their careers are potentially short-lived. And we've seen that in many leaders in this country, but also overseas. Well, clearly the environment in which diplomacy takes place has changed very significantly over the last 40, 50 years. How could it not, given the technology, the transport revolution, which means that not only can leaders talk to each other directly whenever they want, but they can also travel overseas to meet each other whenever they want. I mean, one striking statistic is that in the first 170 years of the existence of the United States, the US president and the British Prime Minister met only once. But from 1940 onwards, for the next 4 years, Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt met 11 times in 8 different countries. So that sort of technological change, transport change, allows politicians, leaders to meet directly without necessarily going through their ambassadors overseas. However, despite the fundamental change in the environment, what diplomats actually do today hasn't changed in the last 100 years. There are 4 main tasks for a diplomat. There's the political task, getting to know your country, who are the key decision makers, how do you influence them, and you give advice back to your own government on those issues. You've got the commercial role, which obviously is extremely important, particularly in countries like, Singapore, United Arab Emirates. It's probably the most important diplomatic role in countries like that. You also have the representational role, and that is extremely important because, if you're a British ambassador, you're not the government's ambassador, you're His Majesty's ambassador. And that nomenclature reflects the fact you're representing the state as a whole, the United Kingdom. And when that comes to the United Kingdom, what does that mean? That means things like the history and the economy and the English language and the culture and the royal family and the Premier League and the elite universities and the special forces. It's all those things about the United Kingdom that foreigners think about when they're thinking about the UK. And that's what an ambassador is representing overseas. And then the last task, and probably what many members of the public would consider the most important task, is consular work. Looking after your own nationals when they get into trouble, when they're arrested and put in prison, when they have an accident, when they lose their passport, any number of their, if into a forced marriage or something like that. Lots of different examples I could give of the sort of consular work that ambassadors do overseas. So although, as I say, the environment has fundamentally changed over the last 40, 50 years, what a diplomat actually does hasn't fundamentally changed. Well, I hope that my speeches are both sort of informative and entertaining. And above all, what I always try to give an audience is a sort of better understanding of the inside politics, if you like, inside foreign policy, inside geopolitics, because in a sense, I'm the person in the room. So I can give a practitioner's account of what really happens when a British Prime Minister meets President Putin or meets President Xi, for instance. And it's giving that sort of insider, practical, experienced insights, which I think audiences find valuable.